welcome everyone to the latest RudderStack tech session. This is a live webinar. We'll of course send the recording out afterwards for anyone who missed it. We have a very exciting guest today. Welcome, Kevin. It's amazing to have you in one of the RudderStack tech sessions.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's gonna be fun.
Cool. Well, this is a topic I'm really excited about. Kevin, I want you to talk most of the time and I will interject with questions, but you reached out and just shared a project that you did using RudderStack and a number of other tools that just sort of drastically increased performance for this company. And it was just an amazing story. So you reached out in our community channel, I pinged you and I said, I've got to get the details here. So we hopped on a call and everyone on our team just sort of said, wow, this is awesome. And then that's what led us here to today. So you 4x leads, you're dominating search results. So let's jump in and talk about it. We'll do some intros first, but then we can talk about the problem and then the way that you solved it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think everyone knows me. I work at RudderStack, but more importantly, Kevin, do you just want to actually give us a little bit of your background? I know you're founder and CTO at Touchless and would love to hear about that, but you've done a number of things before and are a very successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, I've been, I think a lot of stuff that I've done started when I was 7 as a coder. My parents were teachers, and so when we had a Mac computer, there wasn't many games. So we kind of learned how to make our own, and like learn how to work with sprites and like redo kind of icons and stuff. And then that got me into web design. So I did that for a number of years, and then spent about 8 years building a SaaS company. And that experience was very different because that taught me a lot about working with data, working with regulated markets. And it was really shocking to see that even big companies deal with some of these data issues. And when I was outside of that world, I saw kind of the output of some of these projects that they would do, and I thought, oh, they had everything figured out. But reality is everybody struggles with data. So then, yeah, as I passed the baton at my last company, what I'm up to now is just a new way of developing projects where data is at the center of everything. And when you do that, it's been really surprising to see what happens.
And that's something that I definitely want to talk about. I love your approach of designing the data first before you get into the actual solution and architecture. So let's just dive in.
Absolutely. And yeah, so I think the agenda we want to get through is just kind of walk through some of the challenges that this project faced at the beginning, and then some of the results, and then how we did it. But one of the reasons why we focused on this idea of data design was because that was at the center of a bunch of the problems that existed. And one of the goals, when I first got introduced to WaveDirect, was these 3 things. Basically, we wanted to understand the customer journey better. Where do they fall off? What causes them to be engaged or not engaged? There was a goal of enhancing communication. So that means like just getting better at communicating with customers, telling them about new offers and services, or even just to be able to follow up and check in on them. And, to see how things are going a few times a year and do that consistently. That was a goal. But there was also some restrictions. They work in a regulated market, had a system that was on premise, and that couldn't be changed out easily. Doing so would be very impactful to the business. It would be really hard, and also just a lot of cost and risk involved in doing that. So how do you do the first 2 if you can't change the systems out? So it was an interesting challenge. A little bit about WaveDirect. First, just the team is amazing. They're just this local group that cares so much about customers. Like when I would be on site a couple times, there'd be clients that would call in and just right away the staff would be like, oh, that's Jerry. Oh, that's odd. And they'd have just this really deep insight into each customer. just off the top of their head. And it was just really interesting, right? But the data didn't reflect that. But at least the people who work there care a lot about the service. And so for many people,
a culture that sort of supported,
absolutely,
very data driven, but all of it was sort of analog in the employees' heads almost.
Right. And there's a lot of the team that would be there for many years, right? So they know these customers intimately, and but that wasn't reflected in the data either. So the culture was there. And then when we did a survey to all the existing customers back in about February, we saw that 9 in 10 customers were willing to recommend them to their friends and family, which I've never seen before in the telecom sector. So it's just really interesting that their customers also love them. They just wanted more consistency with the way they were communicated with. But yeah, great team. And the other thing is that they're a lifeline to many people in these rural markets where they can't get service maybe through the cell tower or fiber lines because maybe they're their farms or they're outside the city limits. And so they really have been key during COVID to connect a lot of people to the outside world. And so helping them would just felt good too. Anyway, really cool group. And so yeah, these are the goals, right? Again, we want to understand the journey, want to better communicate with customers, and yet there were these restrictions. So first was that the system was on premise, made by somebody else. So we couldn't change the data model that existed there for at least some of that data. And so that was just an awareness, right? We had to deal with that. But we also had to deal with this legacy system allowing free-form entry of data when you added a customer or update a contact. And so if you wanted to do marketing to them, you want to better communicate, which phone number do you use? What if the phone number has notes baked into it, right? Accidentally. Like, it was no one's fault. It was just that the data ended up in this state where it was inconsistent. And so when and I see Joanne was on the call, but we have people on the team, when we first met, we're like, yeah, let's start marketing. The first thing we noticed was like, okay, to who? Like, how do we know who to market to? And which contact information do you use? And it's not standardized. So you see here just some of the stats, but addresses were incomplete. Phone numbers were not properly formatted. Maybe there was dashes or characters in them. And then sometimes the names were not standardized. So a first name might be Joe and Sarah is the first name. Is it Joe or is it Sarah?
Yeah.
So again, I think a lot of businesses deal with this, in general, right? So it wasn't, I see even big companies struggle with this. So it wasn't a new concept, but was holding them back.
Sure.
And also, it affected decision making, and they couldn't really understand their customers because of this data problem. But we can jump into the results. So this is pretty cool. So unexpected, first of all. We kind of came into this thesis going, okay, let's clean some data with the goal of working on retention, which we had an impact on that as well. But what was really interesting to see all the other benefits that came from this. So these are just some of the other highlights. But yeah, an increase in website traffic, an increase in website to lead conversions. So when you look at the visitors that go to the site and who actually who are in market, who are in the right area, and they go through the journey, we saw that going from 1.8% to 10.2%, which was pretty crazy within 45 days too. And so we pulled together the actual kind of building of the site, just for some context, a few weeks before the launch. Like we had a concept of kind of the flow we wanted, but it didn't really get kind of finalized until 2 weeks before July 6th or July 7th. And so just to see that immediate impact was pretty surprising. And the other one too is just now the WaveDirect, because of their local relationship with their community, always had a good conversion rate once people talk to them. But just again, an increase over their average. And I would attribute that, we'll go through some of the more stats later, but just to the customers being more informed. So by the time they were contacted through this flow, they had already looked through a bunch more pages. They already had more context, so they were more comfortable talking to the team. So that was just interesting to see. And then the other, blowout thing was just this average increase in in-market lead volume. So prior to this launch, there'd be a certain amount of leads that would come in, but in this case, this is just a subset over a certain period of time. I believe this is a week or 2 weeks. But when we look at people who were in a certain area who went through the journey that we cared about, just increasing the volume of the right type of leads. Maybe not the overall, lead volume, although that was true, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was the right type of leads. Can we increase that? And the other benefit was just the decrease in poorly formatted data, because it's possible to clean that data as it comes in.
Sure. It's really interesting. It's a good reminder that even if you're really good on the phone, your sales team knows the customer really well. If you don't understand the customer journey, especially as it leads into the sales conversation, you're sort of in many ways treating each conversation the same way, even though intent is very different across the leads you're having conversations with. And then the other interesting thing is, even though they had a good close rate, if you don't have the ability to follow up intelligently, there's just going to be a lot of fall off from the leads that you talk to who are not high intent, who maybe need some sort of follow up. But if the data's wrong, or a number is entered wrong, or there isn't intelligent sort of follow up on that end. And so it's just interesting that on both ends, the data can kind of be a rate limiter, even for a really good sales team.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because even just to enforce a contact strategy, which we learned working with the other telcos, like my last company, our background was working mainly in telecom, where retention is so pivotal. Like one of the clients has a 0.4% churn rate month over month, which is like a fraction of what the others are. And as a telecom carrier, to have something like that, the secret to that was just regular communication. But you can't do that without a tracking of the journey.
Yep.
And even just that audit trail, because you don't want to be contacting somebody multiple times, too soon. Yep. So yeah, you're right. Like there's all these downstream effects, which I think contribute to the fact that the conversion rate's higher. But I also think too, this isn't baked in of some of that downstream effects, right? Like this is only 45 days in. And so I think the real test of this too will be what happens later, right? Sure. Like does that percentage increase if you're able to follow up with them a certain amount of times?
Sure.
Longer term. So
yeah.
Very cool though.
Very cool.
And so if we go so how do we do it? I think this was one of the goals of this, this presentation we talked about was, okay, like what were the factors, right? How do we think about this? And you brought up at the beginning, this approach being kind of a new one. I think for us too, just to do this on an end-to-end perspective that we did with this project, it's beyond normally what you would kind of do with data design, but we're able to kind of design this entire end-to-end process. But what's the impact of doing data design and selecting the right tooling? Is there benefit to that? So just to help those listening, what the lesson is, or what lesson we were trying to draw from the issues that were happening, were some of these points, like the problems that we were facing, right, in the data quality. Again, not anyone's fault. It's because the system kind of allowed that to happen. And even systems, it's hard for them to anticipate all the things that people can do to their forms, right? So it's accidental. But when you look at the problems that existed in the data, what we knew is that the non-standardization of it became a huge blocker to the business to know where it was at and what it needed to change. And we also knew we wanted to progressively identify people and not pull a lot of info about a person without their permission. So privacy was really important to this flow. And the other thing that we knew going into this is when we looked at the data that did flow, like Google Analytics data, when you look at that, we would see a certain traffic volume, but when you actually went deeper in it, you'd see that a bunch of it was out of market. Like they had some pages that really high traffic, but they were in Washington or they're in Texas. And so well-ranked pages, good content, but not contributing to whether someone's going to sign up for their service because they're limited by geography. Right. Their service is only available to Ontario, right? And sections of Ontario too. And so, just you couldn't rely on a lot of these reports. If you just go by the built-in tracker that you pop into your website, right? Something had to clean it a little bit and redefine what a visitor meant or what traffic meant, because not all traffic is important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think this could be a whole additional webinar, but I think more and more, at least we hear a lot that companies are sort of looking at your traditional analytic solutions like Google Analytics and realizing the sort of depth and quality of the first party data required to truly understand whether the traffic is right or not and sort of associate that with touch points way deeper in the funnel. You just have to have an approach where you really are, you're strategically pulling in sort of the raw first party data and doing a number of things with it, which, is obviously what we're going to talk about, but it is, we hear and more that the things that have been working for the last decade from an analytics standpoint just aren't cutting it anymore.
And I see a lot of this in auto too, where I think vendors have told folks, just put my pixel in, right? Here's another pixel to put in your thing. Here's another little script to put in. And then everyone just going to trust that these vendors now are going to sift through everything and really properly identify stuff. And it becomes really opaque, right? And what we found too is like, even in this process, if you actually were to look at our Google Analytics traffic from a before and after, you would actually see Google Analytics traffic drop during this process, even though we're having all these higher results. First, because we eliminated pages and certain bad traffic. But second is Google Analytics will often think of two different visits to the same site from the same person as two different users. And so just relying on them to just do it for you is dangerous, right? Because you actually it could end up being inflated numbers, or you might think that your numbers are worse than they actually are. So either way, like we just knew we knew that we were dealing with some sort of question mark, right? When it came to Google Analytics, even though there was like goals set up and all these things, it looked really sophisticated. No insight really. Then we also, here we go. Other thing we knew just some quick things is we knew we wanted to be future proof. We wanted to be able to swap the back end and front end out at any time with whatever vendor. And we also knew that data had to end up in a warehouse under WaveDirect control in Canada because it's a regulated industry. So we didn't just want to store that in systems like, Segment or whatever and store it indefinitely. It would limit what we could store if we had to use some of these outside systems. So
which limits what you can do with the communication downstream.
Exactly. Exactly. Like why send sensitive data to Segment if you're not allowed to store that there, right? So then all of a sudden now it affects your marketing, et cetera. So we knew that we wanted this ability of flexibility, and we knew that the data had to end up in a place that they controlled. And we also knew that Core Vitals was kicking in, and we didn't really know the real impact it would have in ranking, but we knew that it was kicking in. And when we actually looked at the site, as we started fixing other areas of the data, and we looked at the site, we realized the lack of visibility and the poor Core Vital score was enough to trigger, let's redesign this. Like, let's fix the flow.
Yep.
And that just so we can get visibility to make decisions. And kudos to like the WaveDirect team was incredible in their especially on the executive side, just the entrepreneurial spirit to be able to first recognize that there was a problem, but second be like, yes, let's jump on it. Like that is so risky for companies to do, and yet they made the leap. And so I mean, just a side point, because you don't normally see that. And then the other thing too, as a goal, is we knew we wanted to primarily service customers over text, because that was what the survey said. People wanted to be communicated with through text message, like actual conversations, like quality conversations, not like blasts, but actually like text combos. So then, anyway, if that was the end state, there was a bunch of stuff we had to do. So the approach was, let's design the data to make that possible. We don't know what the interface will look like, but let's design the data first. So you're going to say something?
I love the term data interface design, because in many ways, and I'm not a design expert, but even if you think about things like design thinking and sort of methodologies around that, where you're framing the foundational components first before you actually sort of embark on specifics in the solution. And it's the same concept here. And I think that this is it's really the right way to do it, especially if you're sort of starting over and sort of building, building it from the beginning.
And sometimes you can't do a complete rewrite, right? But at least being comfortable with what the data should look like in the end, in order to give you the result you're looking for, it's just helpful as a guide, right? Just like you do with an interface design, like if for users. But yeah, just the flow was, let's design the data that we want. So we cared about in-market visits. We knew that we had to redefine the funnel, so we had more visibility of where breakdowns happened. And we wanted to be able to mock up that data flow before we ever did the actual design. Like we did start on the UI design a little bit, but it altered the interface design once we finished the data design process. So some of this stuff you can do in parallel, but the interesting thing is the data design drove the interface design. And then we're able to increase page speed as a result, which we'll dive into later. But what we realized is, where does this end up? So when you say data design, we say, okay, if in the end we want clean events and a clean understanding of customer records, and we want to eliminate permanently, ideally, it's a hard thing to say, but it's still a work in progress, and there's always polishing you have to do. But if the goal, anyway, is no duplicates, let's redefine how the data is stored. And so we thought, instead of thinking about contacts and accounts and some of these objects we've been taught to kind of think of, we realized, let's think about it as persons and addresses and organizations and then identities and events, and those can have relationships with a person. And those relationships can change, right? Someone's phone number can change, their last name can change. And so just having this idea of relationships really future-proofs it. And then you end up, this looks probably not super exciting to some of the business folks who are listening in, but just seeing that the data can end up in a clean way,
sure, which
makes your marketing targeting that much more effective.
I think my guess would be that the people listening in who are technical or looking at the recording are sort of, there's almost this sense of relief where we have feels so much more extensible than the forced hierarchy of your traditional CRM system that relies on fields that can be overwritten, or where history is like very hard to manage. And, so you're sort of always having to do gymnastics to get around, this archaic structure enforced by a CRM. And so if you kind of take that away and say, great, let's decouple these components into objects that can have relationships, you sort of the amount of flexibility from there is just freeing.
Mm-hmm. And the cool thing is we did all this in Postgres and ran Hasura on top of it. So now you've got an API. And
that is so cool.
And it's used in a production setting to be able to, using Hasura Cloud, to just manage these different multiple databases, sew it all together into a GraphQL API, and then you can do some really cool stuff with that. So not to geek out too much, but the point here too is you also see, so a couple of things just in this thing, and I'll move on, but just to point out two things. First, you'll see that these two contacts have just even the naming structure. We typically are thinking about people as first name, last name, right? But sometimes you have someone like preferred name Maria, who's Sarah Rodriguez, Maria Santos, and so first name and last name doesn't fit that, right? And so if you actually think about future proofing and international, just allowing the data model to accept something like that and not force you to jam things into these fields, like first name, last name. And the other thing you'll see here is just the standardization of phone numbers, right? So just putting everything always in international format. Even though this is a local, Ontario-based, company, that makes it instantly compatible with Twilio and a bunch of other services if it's put in that format.
Yep. And just one note there that, not that, I don't have any insight into WaveDirect, but if you think about a data format like this and building your company with this sort of extensible format, if you are the type of company who wanted to sell to a larger organization or sort of become acquired, this sort of infrastructure is so valuable to bring to the table in terms of its extensibility, its ability to sort of be integrated into other systems. I mean, in many ways, you can think of it, A, certainly as a competitive advantage, but B, almost as a multiplier, if acquisition is in your future.
Well, and even just to that point, it actually, the data model directly impacts your ability to partner too. Or if you want to acquire someone too, right? Like to fold somebody in. So it kind of works the other way and as well, right? And even I learned this in my last company, but our original data model, we built our app, as a lot of SaaS companies do, a certain way, because that's kind of what we did. It was like a reporting system. And then as the business changed, we were stuck, right? If people wanted us to go in these different directions, we're like, our data model would not allow us to. And it actually closed off probably millions of dollars of opportunity because of the data model being incorrect. And so again, if you can think about things in this more universal way, it makes your ability to say yes that much easier, right? It makes it easier for you to be able to do that. So, okay. Don't want to geek out too much on that. But
let's keep it rolling. Sorry, I just had to say that.
But some people, like I think on the business side, people struggle with understanding why that matters, right? They look at that and like, this looks like a different language.
Sure.
And yeah, it's overwhelming. On the technical side, it's hard for you to tell the business side why this matters and kind of make your case. So it's a challenge that everybody deals with. But let's go through some examples of like what this did, right? So once we knew that's kind of where we wanted to end up, this is some examples of the visibility that we got once we implemented RudderStack in the mix. And so we said, okay, what's actually really important in the journey is we need to have somebody do a lookup. If they don't do a lookup, they're not really a visitor we care about.
Right, and that's doing, just to make sure I understand and the audience understands, they're doing some sort of search on the website for service in an area or a product or something where that's like the key customer event that shows like, okay, this is right. Like that's the moment of truth in the customer journey.
Right, not everyone, it can just apply that universally to all businesses, but like in auto, for example, the journey could start with somebody saying, I'm looking for trucks, right? Or the selection, the time that as soon as they start filling in what are they looking for, it's like a search, right?
Yep.
We wanted that to be like a key event that would start the journey. And while visits are important, it's not a key metric.
Yep.
It's the lookup. The other reason why we did that is because WaveDirect, their service has changed depending on what address someone is, whether it's cable,
Right.
fiber, or stuff.
Sure.
So again, it just made
Yeah,
sense to make this, the key event.
Yep.
And so, yeah, and it's the start of the funnel. Then hover of plan. So which, did somebody kind of start to hover over certain buttons, click of a plan, and then separating out leads to be in market versus out of market. And then, so that way you can also use that data to plan, right? If you have a whole bunch of out of market leads that are in different city, maybe you expand to that city.
Yep.
And then we look at page visits. And then the other thing was this idea of progressive identification. And so we use the RudderStack identify function, but progressively as someone fills things out. So as they fill out an address, not only are we logging at the activity, but it just logs an identify event. And the benefit to that is the next time they come back, they're recognized. And so you end up kind of with this. You see here's this is a real lead from an hour ago. This is the flow, right? So person typed an address, went to the support page quickly, then hovered on plan, clicked on a plan, became an in-market lead, came back, hover over plans again. But see, once they've became an in-market lead, they get identified. And now every future visit they have, they stay identified.
Sure.
So that identify feature is pretty powerful to be able to continue to remember someone.
I remember when I was working on a growth team at a company, and we sort of first implemented this event-based paradigm of customer journey tracking. And I mean, the amount of power, I look at the screen and I remember the first time I saw the same thing and thought, oh my gosh, like this is so powerful. We can learn so many more things. It's just incredible. Like this is when, there's a big buzzword of like customer 360 and full customer journey or whatever. And it's like,
and you'll pay, and these people will pay so much money, right, for the service to kind of get to this state, but you can get here now, right?
Yep.
Just by implementing some of these things, and we leverage RudderStack Cloud, right, for a bunch of this flow. So, So here's what also is cool. All right, so this is a real lead, right? Actual real lead came in today. We can see their visibility, but then look at the timeline. We know because of the event tracking, we know where they started from Google. They would have searched for this most likely rural internet coverage Kingsville. You'll notice that, and we kind of optimize the site very highly for performance, but because the content is customized per area, it ends up getting really high ranking for local searches. And so you can see, number 2 and 3 in the Google rank is WaveDirect. And so they clicked the first one, and then they kind of started with Google, then moved into typed an address 10 seconds later. They didn't even read the article. Even though the article actually has a lot of really good information, they just wanted to start the flow. And so the blog post drove people within 10 seconds to type an address, and then 50 milliseconds later, they are now on the packages page because of Gatsby and some of the other optimizations we've done. And then, so then we see, okay, they stayed there. Then they went to WaveDirect. Sad that they didn't just read everything, but we noticed though, in their case, sometimes people are just looking for that mental check mark, right? Okay, cool. Like these people, checks out next. And so that's what happened. Basically end to end from Google search to 2 minutes and 3 seconds today, we have the full visibility into what happened, and they're a lead that's in market, right? They're in Kingsville. And so it's just cool to see that ability to track that flow and really unpack it, right? And so if you want to optimize things, maybe there's more ways we can optimize the WaveDirect page. Maybe leave it as is, right? Maybe slowing down that purchase process by making this too easy to browse means that it actually makes the funnel fall out. I don't know, right? But we can now run those experiments because we can track it.
Right. I was going to say, even just the, you saying, well, they didn't read the article, and I know this is, just one customer journey, but even just that type of insight is invaluable, right, in terms of optimizing the customer journey.
Also, scary. Like, that is insanely scary, actually, because especially because companies, and including WaveDirect, spent money to write various things and time and energy to write, high quality articles. And yet you can see the consumer of today, sometimes, it's not always true, but sometimes doesn't even, they just want to get through the flow.
Yeah.
And that's actually, it's a very good point. Like, it's surprising. Now again, so this is the tracking, but then in the end, it ends up in the warehouse in Postgres, which is accessible as an API through Hasura. And we also know things like this person uses Cogeco, a competitor, which helps the sales team have context. We know the timeline of events. We know the identities the user has typed in themselves. We haven't scraped that from somewhere without their permission, also because that'll become illegal in Canada, shortly. And so, it was all really important about privacy, right? How we make sure that the person is opting in to give us various information. And even by giving an email, we're not sending it to some automated email journey. We want to make sure that it's a human powered experience. Now that's this for WaveDirect it works, but for other companies you might do it a bit differently. We also know that they were using a Windows desktop, so maybe when the installer comes, they'll be ready to work with Windows.
I love that.
And then we also know all the other lookups that are done that are not this lead, and so that might inform where to expand next.
Yeah.
So just having that warehouse is really important. But here's kind of the flow of how this all works. So we've got, as one data source, we have this on-premise system in MySQL. It can't change, and so that gets synced into AWS. So we set up a Postgres there. And used AWS's data migration service, which is a pretty turnkey thing, to be able to push that live, like within half a second or a second of it updating on-prem. It's pushed to the cloud, and now it's available as an API because Hasura is on top of it. And so we've basically made an instant API on top of their on-premise system, and then we can use that for a bunch of things, right? We also store, again, in that Postgres database, the events from RudderStack and other the clean records too. So we showed that universal data model that ends up in that Postgres database, again with Hasura on top. We have Sanity, which is your headless content lake. So that's where you store these basically content blocks. So if you look at on the WaveDirect site, there's various parts of it like the title and articles and things, but the team can write those articles inside Sanity, and that auto triggers a build process depending on what change they made. Sometimes it takes 20 seconds, but that flow on the left hand side is about getting data in, and then if it impacts the site design or the content, we use Gatsby Cloud, which then pushes to Netlify to be able to build the site. And that's how we got the performance to be where it is, where by the time someone goes to the site, their browser is not thinking about anything.
Yeah.
They just are rendering HTML that's been kind of pre-generated for them. So that's that left side. And then RudderStack becomes pretty key. Once the site is live, RudderStack is collecting events. Again, it's pushing those events back to so Touchless. On our side, we have a product called EXO, which is this data layer that kind of just brings these various sources together and orchestrates kind of this flow. So RudderStack, when it collects things, kind of goes back to us, and we can then kind of close the loop. So in this case, like auto-generate pages based upon some of that data, or update Slack with a notification. Those are kind of things that we do with some of the stuff that RudderStack would do. But the flow is, once we get to the site being built, RudderStack comes in to track events and then pushes it to various places. And that's how we started with RudderStack. I mean, where we're going with it is to use RudderStack for more, things that it can read from. and more flows, right? But just to understand the web experience, this is how that flow ends up. And what's cool about it, because RudderStack is made so you can connect multiple sources and connect multiple destinations, it future-proofs this whole flow. If we want to push things to HubSpot or whatever, it's not a huge lift for us to do that, because we've got this kind of plane, this sheet of glass that just makes it really easy to put other things in front of it. And then we then push from RudderStack as well into marketing systems. So we're looking at MoEngage as a potential flow, and just we tested that experience, but that's some of the goals for the rest of this month. And then we also push this over to StatFlow, which has a programmable messaging layer that frontline staff can use to talk to customers. And so that way they end up with some of that context that's in that data layer, so they can have more informed discussions. So just helps show the pipeline that we ended up with.
I mean, what I love here, and I know we want to leave some time for Q&A, so I'll be brief, but what I love here is if we go back to data interface design, what we see is all of these modular components where the data is flowing in and out, which is just incredible, right? And so you can sort of, you're not bound by the end destination, right?
Yeah.
Or by the source even. And the data can flow freely, which is incredible.
And on that point, before RudderStack, right, we were on the web experience hitting all these various things ourselves. And so that would actually incur more cost and more time. And so if WaveDirect wanted to move in a different direction, we would sometimes have to say, sorry, can't do it right now. So yeah, just data becomes empowering. And then I'll go quickly, and people who want to rewatch this, you might have to a couple of times. I'll go through some of these slides just to kind of highlight some of the stuff we set up before we go to questions. But so just, you can see here, RudderStack is collecting events and then pushing to various destinations. By centralizing it this way, it dropped load time 50% lower than what we were already getting with Gatsby alone. So Gatsby got us down to 1 second, RudderStack took it further. And then we're cleaning data at the point of entry, and then pushing to destinations that can change. Now here's the impact. Here's some of the cool stuff. So you can see change in page rank position happened almost instantly. Actually, within like a week of the site launching with this new flow, and Gatsby in the middle of it, kind of this kind of headless workflow, you can see the impact that the Google's new Core Vitals update does to ranking, because they really emphasize page experience. So the real benefit though is again, you can see once it went up, it stayed up pretty consistently. But RudderStack kind of came in when we kind of hit we had already launched the site, and then we started realizing that we were hitting a plateau in how good our performance could be. So just that impact of dropping the page speed again, you can see the impact it had on average position for various keywords. And then here's just more granular, like you can see this is for a specific kind of keyword pattern like rural internet. So the starting point before this redesign, we were seeing a click-through rate of 2.1%, average position around 20 in the Google rank, and now it's around 6 to 7. In some cases, like you'll see here in the picture, it's number 4 and 5. All right, so with a click-through rate of 17%, and that's within 45 days. And RudderStack was brought in again just about halfway through that journey, and it allowed us to kind of move up to a higher tier.
Amazing.
This is seeing the impact in Core Vitals. So before RudderStack, you'll see this. So yeah, previously the site, this is before even Gatsby and the Jamstack kind of experience. You see that the reason why the ranking was around 20, 30, position was because it was failing Core Vitals on mobile and desktop, and the page experience score was very low. And so once we did the redesign, it was pretty good, right? But just getting that extra kind of bump, you'll notice in this graph, came once we added RudderStack to the mix. So it's not like RudderStack alone will kind of just make this experience, that much faster. But once you do add it, it just gives you that extra edge. And then you can see here the impact it had on percentage of good URLs in the page experience score in Search Console. So we went from already basically, like prior to the redesign, there was around 25% were considered good. We got to about 70%, hit a plateau, added RudderStack, and now we're at 98%. Still working on that last, percentage point, but just shows the impact what it can have if you do improve the performance.
Amazing.
And these are just some of the comparisons of just top 10 keywords that we care about compared to some very large companies. Just the number of keywords that WaveDirect has been able to get top 10 position in comparison before this launch and before the Core Vitals update, they were kind of comparable, about the 30 mark in terms of the number of keywords in the top 10, but now it's 153.
Amazing.
So
and I think one thing that is such a good reminder, and there's so many things here, even just the site speed, even just outside of the data components and the flexibility around that, is that it's easy to forget that a rigorous focus on site performance alone can increase business results, right? I mean, moving from 20 to, average position of 20 to 6, that's going from second page to first page, which is game changing. I mean, literally. I mean, we see that in the numbers, obviously, but and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of components to SEO, and it can be a very complex subject. But if having the foundation where the technical side of it is completely buttoned up is the best foundation on which to really sort of unlock the potential. Yeah,
it becomes the enabler, right? And then you don't have an excuse as to why you can't, right? And with this one, we wanted to push the boundaries. Like, most people, what I used to do is you get to like 1 second load times and stop there, because who gets faster than 1 second load times? And then once we got to like where it breaks, 0.5 seconds or 0.4 seconds consistently, it's like, first, didn't know that was possible. Second, Google seems to care.
Yep.
And then it also impacting click rates. Like some of these, it's just crazy to see. Because of the performance change and the page experience score, Google highlights it more. And so you're seeing for some of these things, some of these keywords, click-through rates 30%, 20%, 15%. Like, it's just amazing to see, right? This was not the intent. So it was more of a just, we knew that we wanted to get performance up. We knew that it mattered to humans, but it shows Google, because they want to make sure they're showing relevant results. They care about it. And then this is the Core Vital scores. So we saw, and again, this always changes depending on where you are and whatever, but typically, we're seeing kind of results around this, like 0.3 seconds, depending on when stuff loads. And so Jamstack, doing this flow where things get pre-generated alone with Gatsby, can get to around 1 second load time. But RudderStack, first, it prevented us from adding extra bloat, because most times you just add an extra pixel to your site. And the crazy thing is, the slowest performing thing on the site is actually the font. It could be even faster, but it's the font, and it's like the Google Maps API and Google Analytics. And so those are the things that actually can add half a second to a second to the load time. And so just by having that in the mix, it allowed us to get, that better performance. And especially, like, this is more for personal, like what we care about Touchless, but building stuff for people on the autism spectrum. On the autism spectrum, what happens as we use things is that you expect a certain kind of feedback loop, and it can be really frustrating when you don't see that 50 millisecond kind of response time or 100 millisecond. Like, it breaks the flow, and it's intense. It makes it really frustrating to use the web. And I've always hated how the web has like excluded people with with that, and there's so many sites that I just get angry going to. Probably most people don't have that reaction, but for me, it's just like, why does this need to happen? And so it's not just about hitting the numbers. It actually impacts people when the performance is this way. And then just to cap off quick, I always say quick, but just anyway, it's really cool stuff. Why we did it this way, right, is that designing the data first enabled creating richer customer experiences. So this is an example of that, and we talked about like that StatFlow product, which is like this flexible thing for people to communicate with customers over text, especially in regulated markets. But it requires good data, but also once you have the data, you can put that in front of the frontline staff, right? So in this case, like these context widgets, or maybe on-prem data or things. So because of Hasura and because of RudderStack kind of communicating with Postgres, we're able to enable data to get put into the front line. And so we're progressively adding more and more of these like widgets and stuff over the coming months. But and I can see, Joanne's part of who WaveDirect is here. It's coming, it's cool. Like you can enable this type of experience. But then the other piece is just the data really should be an enabler across the business. So if you design it to first, yes, it slows down the process a little bit at the beginning, and it's a little boring, but it can really make things more efficient. And we were able to do some of these transformation work at 80% less than what a traditional transformation would cost, because we were able to design the data and be intentional about it. So again, not knowing that would be the outcome, it was interesting to see how now this perfect set of plumbing that exists now, that really wasn't in a mature state 2 or 3 years ago, is a real enabler if your data is done properly. And it can make interfaces faster to build, and it can be used to connect to frontline experiences and make better decisions.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, that's kind of just a bit of an overview of what happened.
I love it. And I'll just reiterate sort of one point, and then we have a couple minutes for questions. Incredible case study. And I think, one of my big takeaways here, looking at the data that was in the tools that the frontline employees are interacting with customers or potential customers, that's the dream, right? Is being able to get that real-time context as you're helping a potential customer. I mean, that is the dream. And if you can do that, it creates happier customers, happier employees, and better business results, which is just truly incredible. Well, we have a couple minutes for questions. Feel free to raise your hand. You can click the button at the bottom of the Zoom window, type something in the Q&A. I'm also happy to unmute you if you want to raise your hand, and you can speak your question as well. One question here, starting out, Kevin, how long did it take to get the basic infrastructure operational? Sort of starting, getting all the plumbing set up.
Well, we did it in a piecemeal way, right? We didn't have to have, like, a lot of the plumbing, the pipeline that you see here, kind of all came together, right at the time around the site being built, right within those 2-3 weeks. I think.
Wow. So just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, like it, and just with an asterisk that it's going to change, right? I think that's also the power of RudderStack, is that we can swap things out, we can add new transformation steps. Like what the schema is today, maybe we realize there's a better way to do it. I think that's okay, right? Yep. So we kind of came into it saying, so the way that we approached it was first start with what they had. So we took the data, as messy as some of it was, and it was like a manual cleanup process to begin with. Put it into Postgres, kind of looking at it, start to understand where it was. And then that was job one. Let's see what clean data looks like. And then we could have the numbers in front of us. Then it was about surveying customers and bringing that in. So we kind of phased it in, right? It was like, let's get an awareness of where we're at. Let's get an awareness of what's the pulse. and then let that inform how we design the rest of this. And we knew that the one truth out of all of this was that we had to have a plane in the middle of it. We didn't really know or care about actually what was the source and what was the destination. We just knew we wanted a middleware layer. And then eventually we knew, we kind of made more informed decisions as to like, what are the must-haves? Okay, using Gatsby, using Hasura, using Postgres, like those sort of pieces. And then we just started to add other stuff later, like MoEngage. Investigating that is just from the past few weeks.
Sure.
So I think the lesson, and maybe not everyone wants to approach it this way, but is that you can do this in an agile way. You don't have to have it all figured out.
Yep.
And it is possible, because of things like RudderStack, to just spin up these things and click a button in RudderStack and it's connected. There's no pipeline. RudderStack is the pipeline, right?
Sure.
So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah,
but
that's great. And I think we have time for one more question here. How much work is involved updating the site with new information? And I think this may be in the context of, if someone searches for something new, or how are you deploying new content on the site? What does that look like?
Yeah, and there's, again, this is an iterative process, right? But you can, depending on where you're updating the site, you might want staff to very quickly type something in, hit a button, and it always goes up. But and it's like there's not much formatting to it. There's other types of pages, like say the plan page, or maybe some key kind of area where you want more controls in place, so that way people don't just push up a bunch of garbage, right, accidentally. But the flow of this, because of using something like Sanity in the mix, is they can log into that, make a change, hit the publish button, and in under a minute, sometimes 20 seconds later, a new page is created or a change is live. So you can decouple these things where before you used to have to build a site all at once all the time, but now you can do things incrementally. So yeah, it should be very easy. And then in areas that are not connected to things like Sanity, I think the job of any integrator or person building with this is to just connect more things into places like Sanity that enable the marketing team. So like one section, for example, in the WaveDirect site, just because we were rushing to get it out, we made one of the things just, kind of coded in React, knowing that we're going to replace it with Sanity later. Well, that stuff, like keeping on top of that type of stuff, is good to do, right? Where, again, you can sometimes get stuff out and solve the problem, and then start to make sure that everything all is connected. And I think that's okay, right?
Sure.
But yeah, it's possible to make it so you don't always have to have like a coder involved in managing this stuff.
Sure. Very cool. Well, Kevin, thank you so much. What an awesome story. What an amazing set of use cases. And we're over time at the hour here, but thank you to everyone who joined. We'll send out a recording and keep an eye out for additional tech sessions in the future. And we'll have you back on, Kevin, for sure, to learn about other cool stuff you're doing and other cool stacks you're building.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks.